Right, this is going to be another one of my donated discussions for the people who pay $100 and are in that tier, can potentially be part of an esports discussion with me, where you could, in theory, ask almost anything about esports. But as you notice, I answer what I want and in the way I want. So I'm probably just going to say whatever I want anyway. Spoiler, that's why I enjoy my content. It's just me being self-indulgent for 20 years. So my guests for this one, I actually have a new guest, someone who hasn't appeared on one yet. Ahmed, who we'll get into in a minute, but an interesting little detail. I'll tell everyone at the beginning. These guys obviously are welcome to talk about any esport they want, and particularly they can bring up obviously my native game of CSGO. But actually, this is a rare episode. I know most of the other ones are like 90% League of Legends or just like maybe some general esports. This actually probably will be a pretty heavy League of Legends one though, because Matt and Ahmed here are both League of Legends people, and I mean, I know Matt's not even that into CSGO, so if these guys want, we can go wild on League of Legends for the next hour, 2 hours, whatever. So Ahmed, the rule always is, if you're doing the first one and you've never done one before, you have to suggest a topic for us to start out with. So what's interesting right now? Is it going to be a League topic? Is there something in League that's interesting to you, mate?
Oh yeah, by the way, I like the Fight Club rule. So yeah, I was thinking to start with, why don't League of Legends orgs talk a lot about their off-season, maybe even to generate some hype at the beginning before the season start around the moves they're planning to make or they're going to make, or is that even feasible in terms of like the legal side of things?
Right, yeah.
Basically around, because I saw Dom did a reaction to a video that Astralis released when did this video where they were talking around hiring Dayo, and they were like thinking, oh, should we do this and that? It was an interesting video, actually. So I was thinking maybe
this is before they signed him. Like,
yes.
Did it as in it showed them like theorycraft, like we could get this guy or something?
Yeah, I think they released it after they signed him, but they released the video that
showing the decision making or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So you just want that type of content, basically. You want to know, like, how do they make these teams? Like, who do they go after? But it's weird. The way you've just described there, I actually think is the most obvious way to do it. Like, I think it would be really fascinating. Like, the obvious ones to me would be, obviously, you don't want it to be Astralis. You want it to be, like, G2, Team Liquid, Cloud9. Like, if there was a documentary that got released 2 weeks into the new Cloud9 lineup that was like, here's like what we did in the whole off season. You know, you'll see on the board like who we were going for. We were going for this Korean. If it didn't work out, plan B was get this guy from Europe, and then and then we got LS. Like, yeah, that would be fascinating. I actually think that would even be the way to do it, because the idea is once you do have the lineup set, at that point, it is fine to, in theory, like reveal your thinking and all that. The problem I would see is this. I don't think you could do it sort of like live. Like, I don't think you could do, for example, like, you know, like TSM Legends, but have it be like the whole off season and sort of update people. Because unfortunately, League of Legends is really weird compared to the other games. So I'll give you a quick contrast. Do you follow CSGO at all, by the way, Ahmed?
It's just a tiny bit.
Right, so in CSGO, though, you might know that you get, like, moves that are almost certain that they're going to happen from all parties, even before they've officially talked. So I'll give you an example. There's a team right now in CSGO, FaZe Clan, which is a pretty famous squad, and it was known for the last year that, like, definitely at some point Rops is going to join this team, because he played with the leader of FaZe Clan, Carrigan, in his previous team, and he's just a really good player who's on a lesser team, and FaZe Clan clearly needed a star player just like him. So it was like an obvious deal that was going to happen. So basically, they themselves could even say, as they did in interviews, like, yeah, of course I want Rops to join, or yeah, we'll be trying to get him, etc. And it was sort of just like, you know, I wouldn't even say it was like a secret behind the scenes, because everyone sort of knew it was just going to happen one day. You can't really do that in League, because the way the off-season works in League is, if you remember, first of all, to talk to a player before the off-season begins, you have to ask his org's permission before you can talk to him and even ask him, is he even interested in having a conversation? So usually, unless someone's like being eliminated from Worlds and say like it's a massive offer you're going to give, usually teams are all waiting until the off-season officially begins. So before that, you're essentially, unless you're poaching, spoiler, everyone low-key poaches, but they just won't say it. Usually what you have to officially do is you're just theory crafting which players might join, and then the second, you know, you're allowed by Riot to pick up the phone and just call the player, you do that, or call his org if he's still under contract. When this happens, though, because it's going to be sort of like, I always compare it to the game Musical Chairs. Do you know that game, mate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously people know it's a game where there's a limited number of chairs, and as each round goes by, you eliminate the people where there aren't any chairs left for them. That's how the off-season works. And so the problem is, the final detail I've got to throw in, which makes this even more complicated, is why basically even people like Team Liquid don't know the team they're getting until the first few days of off-season, is then for LCS, you've got the whole import factor, where it's like, if I actually do sign this import, like a Korean top laner, then all of a sudden, which players I'm going to have in my other roles are different from if the Korean top laner isn't available and I just decide to go with Licorice and NA top laner. So, unfortunately, what it means is the whole off-season in LCS particularly tends to operate by the top 2 or 3 massive orgs have their eyes on a couple of people for key roles, and depending on who they get, not only will the other big orgs, their sort of options suddenly be narrowed and it'll fall into place what they're going to do, but then after them, downstream of them, is all the middle and the bottom of the table orgs who have to make do with whatever's left. So the weird scenario is you can have an off season where in theory you might play all your cards right before the off season begins as a big org, but maybe, you know, you zig when you should have zagged and you don't get the players you want. And occasionally, actually, some mid-table team might end up with, as they could have this split if they'd wanted to, they might end up with the like Jensen double lift lineup, and all of a sudden you're like, what the fuck? Like, I don't, oh, actually, this guy's trying to join. Wait there one sec. Big player going to a different org than you expect can change the whole order of who signs with who and who goes where. Then as a final thing, I'll edit back in at this point, you have to also factor in some players also would join your team if you already had Bjergsen Jensen, but if all of a sudden you ask them and you don't have Bjergsen Jensen, like they've gone to other teams, all of a sudden that player might say no to you and go to Cloud9 instead of, maybe he would have joined some super team on FlyQuest. Obviously, I'm just giving random examples here. So yeah, that unfortunately, I think in League, the off-season is just too condensed and too complex. But I actually think the idea you raised about Astralis is a pretty good point. I think that's the future, is you just record it all. Obviously, you'd have to be very, very careful with making sure none of it could leak. Yeah. And then you just, after the fact, do something cool like you're saying. Because even though, as I say, obviously, I don't care about Astralis, I would be interested in that if it had been any of the big orgs. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, it might be a bit kind of strange. Let's say, for example, Cloud9 was considering, let's say, Andre Giotto, and then they go with LS, and then they release a video at the start of the season saying like, oh, we were considering Andre, and then maybe fans would be like, oh, what the hell, why didn't you hire Andre instead? Like,
there'll be some of that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it might cause some like drama, so to speak, on like Twitter or like stuff like that. I mean, imagine, let's say, G2 would release a video saying like they considered hiring, I mean, like Carlos said last time, like the best of the best, like Hans Sama or like even some Asian ADK, and then they go with Flackard, which might turn out to be good or not, doesn't matter. But at the start of the season, people might flame, they'll be like, what the hell, like you had the option to get Hans Sama.
Oh, you've got to have balls as an org, for real. Yes. Yeah, that's why, if you notice, by the way, people like G2 would be the most obvious ones to do, when people could sort of tank the memes or the hit. Because, by the way, what you're saying there is accurate. Like, again, you can say he's a liar if you don't believe him, as any Fnatic fan probably will. But as far as I know, that is true, by the way. Carlos was trying to get Hans Sama or Viper. Those are the options. For real, for ADC. It just... Now, this is where I realise why some fan will say he's a liar, because they're like, well, then why the fuck did he pick Flack? It's like, listen, I'm not him, so I can't tell you that. I'm just telling you that is, in theory, the shortlist, you know?
Yeah, a fan will always think, "I'll get the best in every position."
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, it's a business, and you have to consider so many other aspects aside from the the financial aspect of it. Also, like the culture fit, kind of the longevity of it. How are you gonna? Is this player marketable? Like, it's a lot of things aside from just skill. Like, I mean, we've seen so many super teams fail just because of like, people don't jive well with each other, or like kind of people have culture shock. There's a lot of variables. It's not as simple as just sign the best players in every position.
Sure.
Is the amount of
go on, Matt.
Is the amount of like team, like building team building of like org business wise, like even like business applicable to like make these videos, or like who's following and how are they, like, is the market value of building your team brand worth putting in a documentary of like how you built your team in the off season? Even I don't, like, YouTube videos aren't making like teams anything, right?
Oh, listen, it's not going to make you money in that regard. I just personally think it would be put it this way. Basically, I think it would have value in the sense that, like, I mean, first of all, behind the scenes content's always useful. You can use it in documentaries and stuff later as well. You know, there's cool things you can potentially do with it down the line. But I also think more importantly, if you're a legit org, so the best example of this would have been Cloud9 actually. If you're a really legit org where people sort of trust the owner and don't think it's just some idiot or some cynical person, I think it would just essentially make all your moves make more sense to your fans. Because half the problem is, cause fans don't know what a crazy sort of spinning plates, musical chairs scenario in the off-season is, I think a lot of fans make very like drastic judgments on how their org did in the off season, but sometimes they don't know that like there really were seasons where like Team Liquid was trying to sign like Chovy mid lane. That's real. Like that's not just some made up story. Like they're going for people like that. Like, you know, that's the level that sometimes these teams go for, and it just so happens maybe they missed, or maybe said no, or maybe sometimes the mad ones is the stories where they really have offered like 5 million and the guy just said no and went and played for 1 million in Korea or something. So sometimes you almost can't even be helped. Like if you saw that in a documentary, you'd be way more forgiven if you found out that they didn't get such a great player instead. But at least you knew, you know, your org sort of shot for the moon, as it were. I think as much as it could also be a negative, I could also see massive positives could come out of it. And in certain cases, like the Flaccid one's maybe the best example, because the hype I heard from G2 people was like the tryout just really impressed them, and they thought from the tryout like he's the perfect fit for what we want. Well, if they could even have like, you know, players saying that in a boot camp, or coaches like having a discussion like, and he's actually like sort of fitting in better, that would sort of get you hyped as well. Whereas at the moment, the problem is, if you hear the rumor, like I've mentioned, like they could have signed Viper or Hans Sama, then any fans like, oh, well, I can't possibly get hyped about that. How can Flaccid be as good as them? Like, that's just the way your brain's going to work. I don't blame them. You know, if you're a casual, of course, your brain would go to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, everyone would have loved to see G2 Hans Sama. And let's say it also takes courage for them to do something like this. It's a risk.
Sure.
Like, you can say, oh, yeah, he's a cheaper player, like, you know, it costs less than like a Reckless or a Hans Sama or whatever, but it is a risk. Like, they haven't like won a title in the last year, and if they fail this split again, they're losing a lot of fans. Potentially they're losing a lot of like kind of trust from other players to be able to join, to be able to attract great players in the future. So it is still a risk they're taking, and you have to like respect them for doing that.
For sure. Right, Joseph. By the way, do you want me to call you Joseph? What do you want to call you?
Token also works well.
Token?
Yeah.
There you go. Right, Token here. This must be the perfect point to bring you in, mate. Bearing in mind, if anyone knows, the thing I've always praised about Team Liquid Org is, actually, I do think Steve Arhansett almost just does look at a shortlist and go, right, start at the top of the list, just sign all the big names I can. And then I always felt like he just sort of gives his fucking coach like a giant Santa Claus-style goodie bag and just goes like, figure that out. You know, you just make that into a fucking team, mate. Because Team Liquid just smashed together so many big names over the years. So what do you think of this whole thing of the off-season and how teams sort of like market it, or how much insight they give you as to what they do? What do you think?
So since I've been a fan of like Team Liquid for so long, I've always found it like super fascinating how they're able to just spend like bags and bags of money in order to get like the best talent possible. And almost just kind of makes me wonder like where like why exactly don't like I guess like other orgs, like, because you see with like Team Liquid, they're obviously shooting for the moon for every single roster they put together, because they're really trying to win worlds, whether if it's possible or not.
Yeah, sure.
And I kind of like want to wonder why, like, I guess like other orgs don't seem to like, I guess like put that amount of like money in as well as like Team Liquid, because they're always trying to shoot for like titles and everything. And sometimes you see like TSM, like I'm super fascinated by what's happening with them this season, because you know they apparently like, you know, like on the outside it looks like they have bags and bags of money too with the FTX deal, but like you see the roster they put together and the fact they didn't pick up Jensen and like that possible like double lift roster, and you're seeing how like their org credibility is like tanking as this season goes on. It just makes me wonder like why exactly like don't more orgs go for like the more liquid approach?
I mean, essentially, I'd love to get other people's take, but my take would be, on the one hand, I don't totally know myself, in the sense that what you say is how people always characterised it, even going back sort of 5-6 years ago when they first joined Team Liquid. If people don't know, the other orgs behind the scenes used to sort of like, in a derogatory fashion, almost be like, yeah, well, you know, in the short term it'll work, burning through all that money, but let's see where they are in like, you know, 5 years. Whatever. And the joke is, in 5 years, they still seem to be at the top of LCS with all the other teams that didn't do it. So whereas you've seen there were years where Cloud9 and TSM did like min-max, like a couple of years ago, people people don't know, season 9, season 10, they were getting actually like an insane amount of value out of their rosters relative to what they had to pay, because they had certain people, Bjergsen, I think maybe Jensen, they had certain people on like contracts that like were signed years earlier and were sort of like the craziest money that you would have had to pay in the previous off season. So there was a few years where Cloud9 and TSM were almost like fine being second or third, as long as they only had to spend like third or fourth money, if you know what I mean. Like to them, that was worth it. Whereas Team Liquid did always seem to just stack big money signings and go for the top spot. The problem is, in the early days, like I say, people would have said, right, well, all you've done is you've just played a different strategy. You played a short-term strategy where you burned through loads of your equity and sold loads of it off. But your problem now is, what do you do later? But the thing is, that's where it almost like they've almost met up again. Because if you notice the last couple of seasons, I mean, you'll know this from Cloud9 particularly, but obviously TSM, even with the last couple of lineups, they've spent an enormous amount of money, even though maybe the lineups weren't great. And so actually the last few seasons, it's like CE9 and TSM got sick of losing, and they just decided, right, we're going to take a couple of cracks at going for the big names, the Perkses of the world, get these players in, and we're going to try and win. So it actually feels to me like at this point in time, most people have sold a lot of the equity they're going to sell in these orgs. So yeah, maybe Cloud9 and TSM got more for their equity, but even then, like that money that came years ago at this point in time has probably already been spent and invested. So I almost feel like at this point, I don't even know if it'll turn out that actually the Team Liquid approach was as sort of short-sighted, because now I feel like for example, TSM's blown all these millions and they're going to come last place. Like Cloud9 blew all those millions, and yeah, they got a top 8 at Worlds. That's cool, but it ain't quite the same as going to like the finals or something, is it? And obviously, Cloud9 already used to get top 8s at Worlds even with the min-max rosters. So yeah, it's a tricky situation. It's basically the problem esports in general has, which is, do you want to win? Well, if you want to win, you're probably going to have to slightly overpay because of all the fuckers you're bidding against. But if you overpay, your org might have harder business time down the line, where some people just want to kind of survive 10 years and then they'll worry in 10 years about if they're the best. And, you know, once the business sort of levels out, you can maybe make money. But I wondered what other people thought. It's a pretty wide open topic, to be fair. So feel free to speculate away. What do other people think about this topic? Why are the other squads in NA don't spend like TL does every off season, basically?
The joke is the reason why other teams don't do what Team Liquid is they're lacking liquidity.
There you go. Not bad. Not bad.
I actually don't know if they don't have enough money as Liquid does, but like you said earlier, I think what Team Liquid did is, I think it's a good investment, because it's not that they just won a couple of like titles. They used to be forever fourth, the meme, they were always fourth, but now they're considered top 2. So even when they don't win, you still consider Team Liquid as one of the top teams, which is great value. It attracts fans, it attracts a lot of, you know, eyeballs. That alone brings money in. So yeah.
I guess you also have to look at that, like that was fourth like 4 years apart, 4 or 5 years ago, where and most recently the 4 back-to-back titles. But like, what is it now in 2 years if they fall off? If people remember those next 2 years, and where are we at in LCS esports in 2 years or 4 years? I don't know if like that value is going to be there. Whereas like if you're in the franchise system, you're kind of in the franchise system, right? And that's probably why other teams aren't doing that as well.
Oh, we'll definitely say, by the way, if you're not a really big org who thinks that spending the millions will make you win, like, I'll give you an example. I doubt Golden Guardians, even though you might know that the Golden State Warriors are one of the investors in that, or at least some people who have stake in the Golden State Warriors, there's a distinction to be made there. Even though in theory they could have big backing, you notice they're going for the most obvious min-max approach, where they've sort of just given an Aero the project and sort of told him just sign people from small regions and NA players, basically. So that type of a team, I suspect, is just about what you're saying. It's about just staying LCS while it's getting going. You've got your franchise spot. You've already spent the millions for that. Now just put together a bunch of teams. By the way, as long as you're not last place, you know, as long as you're like borderline playoffs, maybe you got a chance to get in, it gives your fans something to watch. But yeah, that strategy is more like they're waiting for sort of like the whole business to level up, and then presumably then you go in. But I mean, as a fan, that doesn't help you, does it? Like, we have to still watch the games at the end of the day. I can't watch the game and go, well, it was a shit game, but at the end of the day, the way they've balanced out their fucking margins, so it's excellent, isn't it? Like no one really cares about that part.
Yeah, there's also the whole arms race approach. Is
for sure.
If Team Liquid is spending the most, you're gonna have to overspend Team Liquid. And if you don't get the players that Team Liquid gets, then you have like a slightly worse version. I think an example of that was like CLG last year, or that expertise. But CLG last year was technically a good team by the names, but they just like were 10th place. And I think behind the scenes they said like they were paid like above
Oh, I
average.
could absolutely believe it, yeah. If you look at the names they have, if people don't know, go back and look now. And before that split began, that's a minimum like a mid-table team, you'd think. If not like, maybe like a dark horse if they had like a nice chemistry, it was coached well. But yeah, the premise is, despite actually going for what for CLG were big names, yeah, they were 10th place, unfortunately. And if people don't know, the reason why it wouldn't surprise me, by the way, that they would have been paid good money is because I actually heard that CLG, the org, was one of the teams that in that off-season was potentially in the market to have a super team of their own. Like maybe there's a world where they might have had a team with an LS coaching them, or they might have had a team with a Perks or something. I think I heard they were sort of in that, at least in that conversation, even though clearly they did not win out and they had to go a different route,
Yeah, it's crazy to think that even some of the bottom LCS teams have the money to create like super teams that are.
Yeah, if they want, in theory, right? Like the maddest one to me is, I actually do. If you look back in history, there's been 2 times now where if they'd really wanted to, Golden Guardians could actually have made the push to try and become an elite team in LCS. The 2 periods are the year they had Froggen in Season 9. If you remember, the first playoffs, they were like 5th to 6th, and they only lost in 5 games to FlyQuest, who was like top 4. And then in the second split in the summer, they were like in a mad tiebreaker, and they just didn't make playoffs. So if you look at that team, you're only talking like 1 or 2 signings, and that team would be mixing up with the best teams in LCS. Then you go obviously to the squad where they sold most of them to 100 Thieves. If they just choose not to sell the 100 Thieves and tell those players, like, we'll just bring in a good mid lane or something, whatever you would want, in that scenario, they also could have done it again. They were right on the cusp again. Remember, that was the one where they almost knocked TSM out, the split that TSM won 2 years ago. So to me, it's like, you can sort of see by what these orgs do, now that we know they've got the money in the franchising era, which ones are sort of have a set philosophy and which ones are trying to be the best. Like, essentially, Golden Guardians has sort of said no thank you to a couple of chances to double down and go for the big team. Whereas, like, look, as much as people might not like some of the other squads, and CLG is probably a decent example, at least some of the, Evil Genius is probably the best example, because Evil Geniuses realistically haven't done much in terms of placing, but they've spent money the last few years. Like, they've gone for some of these teams, so fair play,
Yeah.
They have a different goal.
Yeah, there's also like a standard of networking and prestige that Liquid has, where you need 2 imports in LCS, and if you don't have like the networking to get imports into your team, you're just like never going to build a super team.
Yeah. Well, the ultimate example. Yeah, the joke is there because what you said earlier, Thorin, about like kind of the off-season hinging around one player moving, because literally all the orgs have their import slots maxed out. The joke is they're all imports, but the official imports maxed out.
Yeah, exactly.
So if one is like unlocked or like locked, then the whole dominoes can't fall.
That even itself made it more complicated as the years went on, by the way, because at the beginning it was just, are you an import, are you an NA player? Then there became this middle ground where, as you see, you notice I'm consistent with my principles. Like, whenever I talk about Hooney when he's in TSM, yes, I might flame him doing bad in the game, but I always point out the whole time he has been in TSM, he has been considered an NA resident. So you can't actually, in terms of like, should you sign him, judge him based on his absolute raw level of play, because actually you're not judging him versus Summit. What you're judging him against is who are the other NA top laners. So actually he's being judged against Impact, Licorice, Revenge. These are the players he's been judged. So actually, all of a sudden, as much as it's so easy, like historically when he was an import to meme on Hooney, the joke is actually now it's sort of fine to have Hooney. Like, he's actually a pretty good player for an NA player in the top lane. So yeah, there's the other thing that happened in the offseason as well. Not only does your import now suddenly change your whole draft, sort of call it a draft strategy, off-season strategy where you have your big board, but then also there is this sort of like second class of player that is Hooney, Impact. It would have been people like Someday when people still gave a fuck, basically the players that have the NA status but on paper can be way better than a normal NA player, because after your import that becomes the second most important person to secure it in your team, because if you get like an Impact and that's your top laner, that plus good imports, you've already got the makings of potentially the best team right there in LCS.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. When you think about it, Hooney, before he got his NA residence, used to be a mediocre import. And then when he became an NA resident, became one of the best NA top laners because he switched to another tier, like another league,
Exactly.
so to speak. Yeah.
Like
But
the big news people missed, by the way, this split is the story of Core JJ getting his green card.
Yeah.
I don't think people realise Core JJ, if you look over the time he's been here, so he joined, if you remember, in season 9. That means he has been here now for, this would be his 4th year, right?
Yeah.
Let me see, 10, 11, 12. No, this would be his 3rd year.
Does that count his like initial stint in like
AD carry,
Dignitas as,
yeah.
like, AD carry?
No, who gives a fuck about that? He wasn't even playing the same role, mate. As I'm talking about when he
Doesn't that
joined
count in?
Team Liquid. No, who gives a fuck? It was years
Okay.
ago.
But in green card year, I think is what he's talking about. I
Right.
don't think it does.
But when he now gets a green card, that means essentially the most valuable player in the LCS now is counted as an NA player.
Yes.
So Team Liquid already was pretty stacked, but like they could actually potentially next year get an even better team.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they could get an import jungle, like that would be better than Santorin.
They could for real just bring like Jankos instead of Santorin,
Yes.
and that could just be their team.
Yeah.
That might be the best Western team, by the way, if you look at that team on paper. I mean, obviously Bjergsen will have to step his shit up, but assuming he gets his shit together, you know he's got time. It's only the beginning of the split.
Yeah. I mean, the current Team Liquid has the potential to be the best Western team, including LEC teams. They have a stacked lineup. But yeah, by the way, I really liked whoever was working for Team Liquid that like released that meme with the TF with the gold.
I think it was Dodo.
Yeah, the TF with the green card. That was a really nice one.
Yeah.
What do you think, though, Joseph? This is in talking around. This is more in your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, like I actually had like a question on like Team Liquid, and like you see throughout like the split, like Bjergsen's kind of like because he's an NA resident, like he's been performing like well for like NA standards, but like he's still not the like Bjergsen that like we know from like past seasons, and it kind of makes me wonder like because like the kind of narrative right now going around is that Bjergsen is kind of like a supportive mid laner, and he's kind of facilitating like the rest of the team. But it makes me question whether or not him playing that supportive style is really going to like pay off in terms of like worlds, because I feel like that's what they should be really trying to shoot for now, because like winning NA LCS titles like are all cool and everything, but like they should really be trying to go for world success. And like if he doesn't kind of like step up in terms of like world mid laner status, do you think Team Liquid has the balls to cut Bjergsen?
Oh, I don't think there's any world in which they're going to cut Bjergsen personally. Like, in my opinion, Bjergsen and Doublelift are two players who genuinely, they can phone in splits. Like, it's just allowed. I mean, you could say on some level it's justified. I mean, you look at the track record they've had, but it is a bit fucked. So, unfortunately, I do suspect that he'll sort of be like these results are fine. I think these results for the org are fine right now, and they're not that concerned. My concern is, as you say, I'm always tracking towards what will you do at Worlds, and my problem is this. You could do an LS style 20-minute breakdown about how actually right now in the meta it's really unique to be able to play like supportive mids and what it allows you to do with top lane and ADC and how do you change the game. You could do a whole 20-minute presentation. At the end of the presentation, here's what I would say to you. Yeah, but the problem is, mate, I watch the LPL and LCK and I watch Rookie and Knight and fucking like Faker and Showmaker. I watch all these Xiaohu. I watch these monster mid laners shit stomp the game from mid lane. And guess what? Nah, they aren't opting into like a fucking supportive mid so that the guy on top lane can have a fun game. They aren't doing that, guys. So my problem is I look to Worlds and I'm like, either you have to hope Team Liquid has like gone down some genius meta side path that no one else understands, and let's be real, that wouldn't apply at Worlds. It's so long from now, isn't it? Like, or Bjergsen at some point is going to have to also perform like a world-class mid laner. So it's not like he can't. Like, remember, he has just had a whole year off. He hasn't been an active player. I'm sure there's ring rust. I'm sure mentally you have to adjust to a different game. Like, the game has changed in terms of how you play it macro-wise the last few years. But certainly, if you're a fan looking towards Worlds and you're hoping, like, there's a lineup that's definitely going to make Worlds, and then at Worlds, you know, how deep can they go? There's your number one concern, though, is your mid laner. Because my issue is this. As someone who watched every game Whippo probably ever played in the LEC, he's not a player you really want to like have be your star in the team. Like, if anything, his qualities are, I often compare him to like, I mean, yeah, but the problem is I'm not trying to do CSGO examples here, mate. If you want like a League of Legends example, I'd compare him to like Pawn from Samsung White. There you go. Because in Samsung White, they never really just played hard through mid lane. It wasn't about him being the star of the team. He was just allowed to do whatever the fuck he wanted. And in doing so, if the rest of the team's OP as fuck, which Samsung White was, that occasionally you just have to deal with porn as well. It's like, fuck, we're already dealing with the rest of it. So to me, yes, in NA, Whipple's one of the best top lanes, so you play through him, it's like, lol, he is smashing the lane. It's like, but that's not going to happen when he goes against the shy. It's not going to happen when he goes against the best players in the world in top lane, is it? Like realistically, you're probably not going to play through him at that point. So to me, it's just like the old classic problem that, I mean, TSM's probably the most famous org for this, right? You sort of play to win this split, and then you start thinking, right, well, now that I've got Term Asylum Worlds, I better start thinking about it. And it's like, at that point in time, mate, your year just began once you made it. The other teams began at day one of the year. Like, you're behind. You're always behind the 8 ball for me in that scenario. Someone else jump in?
In my supportive mid presentation here, I think there was a team called RNG last year who played with Cryan, and there was an Annie mid in semifinals. So,
let me think. It was quarters, but yeah.
Quarters. Okay. So
yeah, but A, they lost, and then B, they had Jiaohu, mate, and Whipple went Jiaohu.
But could he be?
No, he couldn't be.
No.
I don't think people realise that guy was an incredible. Like, here's what people probably don't get is you could actually tell Zhao who role swapped because he wasn't actually like put it this way, if you go to the Alphari school of what top lane is about, he wasn't that great a player, mate. He was just an alright top laner. But the reason that guy was like a genius is he just knows how to win the game, mate. So he was just, you could tell he had a totally different vision on the end. Whipple's just a fucking player, mate. He's not some genius. He's just good at talking on talk shows, that's all.
Yeah.
And even then, how good is he? I think a certain episode that will never be released suggests it's maybe not quite as good.
Yeah, Whipper is a very good coin flipper. He does make a lot of good plays, but sometimes he will just make one play that will completely lose the game. I mean, you compared him to the Shy at one point. I think that made perfect sense. He could be like the Shy, obviously a lesser version, not as good as the Shy, but...
Nah, because here's the thing, mate. The Shy, if you watch LPL, he has his downtimes as well. He has some games he fucking hints like a motherfucker. So I even think you don't even have to qualify it. Like, he's just like a Western Shy. It's just obviously, we assume the best Asian player is slightly better than the best Western player, right?
Yes, yeah. He does make a lot of like crazy, volatile plays. I mean, the joke is like he left Fnatic. Now Fnatic looks a bit more kind of conservative and like, conservative is a relative term, but they're less taking less risks and kind of diving less, all those crazy plays. Even though Hylissang is still there, but yeah, they kind of became more tame, so to speak. But yeah, he does tend to do that. I mean, we've seen the game recently, the C9 versus TL game, where he played Jax and literally entered the lane and then did a good play to bring back the team, and then again entered in mid lane to try to kill the enemy AD carry, literally flashing on a Jinx between 2 towers, and he just died and they took Baron, and that was game.
That's the other problem I have with Team Liquid. So I'd actually be interested to see what you think, Token. Because the other thing is this. From the teams that Hans Sama has been on, for me, the team works the best if you actively play through him. Because as far as I've been told over the years, he's a pretty quiet ADC player. He's not really like the guy who's going to like demand what's happening. So basically, he's clearly a skilled player. But if I were them, I would be making the whole team play through him. So there's the other issue is... Like, it's pretty rare in League of Legends you can play through top and bot at the same time. Like, I'm not even sure that would work in the current macro. To some degree, I guess it can. I guess the part of the problem is you don't have the TP early as well, do you? So it's a bit tricky to make work. What do you think of this Team Liquid lineup?
I don't know. Like,
sounded like you believed all the shit you were saying earlier. Like, you weren't just like repeating like that fucking narrative. You buy the narrative, right? That he can sort of for now be like the supportive mate and level his game up, right?
Like a bit, but one thing I was really bummed about this offseason was like
weren't you a bit underwhelmed, dude? Like, if your team, like, think about it. How long have you been a Team Liquid fan?
Oh, like 2015.
Right, look, as much as, to be fair, I've just had Jensen, it was pretty good, so I'm sure you won't complain those. But even so, if you hear, like, dude, we're getting Bjergsen, like, your mind flashes back to all the years when he was in his prime, right? You think, fuck, finally, we're getting Bjergsen. So, like, if you then see him in the games now, you've got to sort of be a bit underwhelmed, right? Like, well, it's not really the Bjergsen I thought I was getting, you know.
Like, of the old days. And, like, the fact that they, like, let go Alphari as well, or, like, Alphari went to lose.
Sure.
Because, like, I was a really big fan of, like, Alphari in terms of, like, top lane.
Right.
Like, I thought he was, like, amazing. I never really bought the narrative that, like, you know, like, they created, like, while he was in LCS. I was like, oh, he's not really, like, he's good at laning, but he's good at nothing else. Like, I thought he was, like, phenomenal. I was really bummed that they let him go this offseason.
Sure.
So, yeah, like, I don't know. I think this like Team Liquid roster will probably win like one of the LCS splits. Like I feel like they're bound to do, because like the only competition right now I think is like C9, and I still have questions about like C9 in terms of like playoffs and how well like the team is going to mesh, especially with like LS, their main coach like being let go. I feel like Team Liquid will have like a better chance of winning in playoffs than like C9. But in terms of like, I don't know, like in international play, I don't really have too much faith. Like I feel like it's just like another year where like they might just go 3-3 in groups again, and we'll be bummed like, oh, maybe next year, and like they'll tweak around the roster. But I don't know. Like I really would have preferred Jensen in a sense, because like like you saw him last year in Worlds. He was doing a really great job of carrying that team through groups, and because they were only able to get Hansama, I believe, because of Bjergsen. So those two were tied together. So like it makes sense to take that duo over say like Jensen and Tactical hypothetically, but I don't know. I'm not like I'm hopeful like for like winning the splits, but I'm not too hopeful for like international performance.
No, I think that Bjergsen could play a supportive mid style, and they could just throw it all through Hansama and like do the lane thing. If you have like a roaming or like a support mid play style, like there's enough stuff in the meta that you can avoid the important points in mid where you're like bad because you're a support.
I mean, good luck doing that against Rookie, mate.
Hans.
Good luck with that against Rookie.
Yeah.
I mean, there's strategies around it as long as you don't get that fisted in lane, which like those champs are meant to be like lane escapers. Like you have the.
I don't think you can escape lane against Rookie. I mean, like you can't escape anything. I mean, we've seen it. The thing that springs to mind is when he played Zilean against BDD's Set. Like, bear in mind, Set is a melee champion, by the way.
Yeah. And but Zilean's also like the weakest support mid. Like like the other casters are more like viable. I think Zilean isn't really a good example here.
Yeah, no, we'll see. Well, it's not just about surviving lane. If you just get pushed, then you completely lose pressure around the map, and the enemy mid laner can just hover around the other lanes. You completely cede objectives. It's a bunch of things that you lose. It's not just the CS in lane. You can completely ruin your team's like kind of chance to win the game just by being under your tower in mid lane. I don't think you can do that right now, especially with TP not being a thing anymore. Like you have roaming mids, which like Rise, TF, they are super OP right now because of the lack of TP. And if you are under your tower, then you're completely giving up your.
If you're just giving up lane, it's not necessarily what I mean. Like TF and Rise are kind of more like can also be played support. I'm Rise, but like TF can be viewed as like a supportive play in this sense. If Bjergsen picks TF and he like helps Hansama, he doesn't really need to be fighting Rookie one-on-one with TF.
No, I agree. No, I agree. But if he plays TF and he's pushed under his tower, there's no way he can roam. If he roams, he will completely like lose the game because he will lose plates and pressure in mid lane. So it's a lose-lose situation, I think. They should have kept Jensen. Jensen is always great at Worlds and international in general.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So what do you think, Token, that a TL win at Worlds would be? Just getting out of groups?
Like how would... Oh, right. You mean like the actual... Not like win Worlds. You mean what would like a good performance be? What would the expectation be? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, like I would love for them to like like first of all like make it out of groups. It's been painful to like see all these like Liquid rosters for the past couple of years just go 3-3 at groups. So like first off, like they should probably like make it to quarterfinals. And I feel like if they get like a lucky draw, best case scenario should be like pushing semifinals, but I feel like that's like the cap of what like an NA team can do at Worlds with like how many like restrictions they have, because like as soon as you get to like semifinals, you're gonna be going against some monster mid laners, and like besides Jensen, I don't think there's any like mid laner, like say like native mid laner that can really go against those players. And like Liquid is in like kind of like a tough spot right now because they have an important top lane and with their AD carry, so there's like not really like much wiggle room they have to like kind of like get a better player for mid in that sense. So they're kind of like locked into trying to find the native mid laner.
They've been unlucky at Worlds, no? They always get
Yeah.
a tough draw because last year they got the group of death with Genji and Mad Lions, and the year before they got Suning and G2. I think they've been unlucky a bit in the draw.
Every time. Every single
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
They also
They-
got unlucky in the group last year as well, because they could have gotten out of that one as well.
Yeah, he said yesterday as well.
Yeah. And they always do well, and it's really close. They're like 3-3, and they lose a tiebreaker or something. I think they do better than other teams, and they don't qualify. So it's been a bit rough for them.
Yeah, but it's also like, I don't know. I don't really like that idea of like, oh yeah, they almost made it, because it's just kind of shit at the end of the day.
Well, it's
Like,
better
they
than
should've- yeah.
0-6 TSM.
I suppose, but like you're still out in groups. That's at least like my opinion on it. you know?
Yeah.
There's also like TL isn't even like an NA team. So like I would expect you want semifinals for them, because they're essentially not an NA team because they have all
The
the
LEC
import green
team
card.
is-
Yeah,
yeah,
they're an LEC team and LCS. But if you just want quarters, is it just the NA region that would hold them back? Is that what you think?
The other problem for me, I have to just say, if you watch League of Legends long enough, is like, is no one else just sick of getting the fucking football taken away from them, Lucy and Charlie Brown style by Santorin, every fucking world championship? Like every LCS, you convince yourself, like, you know what, I think he's got it together this time. Like, he looks solid, he's looking good in most of the playoff games. Like, this is one of the best junglers in NA. Then he goes to Worlds and it's always just like, oh, fuck, this guy's back again. It's like Gremlins or something. Did some fucking cunt put water on this guy? Like, what's happening to him? He's hitting again. Oh, fuck, he's doing nothing. Like, every year, guys, I feel like every year he fucking wrecks me. That's why I've never fully sort of really believed in Santorin. Like, I've always felt like, for me, yeah, the problem is because he's an NA resident again, he probably does always deserve to be in a contender, but I don't really know if I want him in like the number one NA team, you know?
Yeah.
Santorin feels like kind of has what I call the NA mentality at Worlds, which I feel like a lot of NA players have this thing where when they're at Worlds, they just freeze. They don't want to risk or like do anything that may make them look stupid. I might just be kind of just...
No, I think there's something to that, mate. It's actually, in my opinion, the main difference between LEC and LCS, right? Fans will tell you it's the player quality because they have to, in their mind, believe EU over NA. By the way, EU is over NA. As we just said, Team Liquid Biscuit is an EU team. But obviously, the fact that you have EU players, logically, that doesn't mean that they're better, is it? Because they're from EU, you fucking idiots. But I would say, what, in my opinion, is the biggest differentiator isn't skill of it. It's what you just said. Think about when Fnatic sends any of their teams to Worlds. Dude, they don't always send like a world beater, but you know the team's going to actually fucking go for plays and try and win the game. I agree. Most of the LCS players almost look like they're just shit scared about what the fucking Twitter thread's going to be like when they in the game, you know. So it's one of the reasons why, in that sense, actually, I'll give him credit. At least Blabber just straight up ints a game. He doesn't just fucking go invisible, does he? Like he just if he does a bad job, he does a bad job, but he kind of goes. He tries to at least win the game to some degree. I always did get that vibe that some of the NA teams just sort of like they play not to lose.
Yeah, by the way, I love that you mentioned that because when you watch Fnatic in 2019, even though they had Nemesis and Reckless, two players that could be like the NA players where they're too passive, you can watch Hylissang against SKT literally play Leona like flash on Khan, Vladimir, like Q ult him. Like he's just like super decisive, doesn't care, like just take a risk. It doesn't matter who we're playing against. It doesn't, like, it's just the best of one, like just flip a coin, so to speak, and see, you know, where it lands. So yeah,
indeed. All right, someone else who's got another topic. Where are we going next?
I had a question on like in terms of like contracts, not the player, like like the actual like paper or whatever, because I was fascinated to like see how Perks and Alphari was just kind of like able to leave their orgs after like signing those like mega deals. Because like especially with like the Cloud9 announcement, when they announced that they signed them, they made this like big like hoorah about like, oh yeah, we just signed like the GOAT and we're gonna like you know, like the messaging was like, we're gonna build around this guy and he will be a part of our team. And then in 1 year he's like back in like LEC. So like it makes me wonder like how exactly does that like has that worked? Like,
here's the key detail.
Out of their deals.
A lot of people I noticed either didn't hear this or didn't see this. There was somewhere, I forget exactly where, it might even have been on Reddit. Like, you know, sometimes Jack will himself go on Reddit and like reply to fans about a move or something. Yeah. I'm almost certain somewhere he said a line and he phrased it very carefully, where the explanation, the line went something like this: we didn't lose any money on the Perks deal.
Yes.
Think about what that means. That means, by the way, Perks didn't just leave. Low key, look, with the way the year went last year, the Worlds result was good because, like, obviously, if you can say you get out of groups, out of the group of death, obviously you take that. That is mega. I know in the moment he was loving that result, but realistically, that team wasn't going to go that much deeper. Like, you'd have had to get like the absolute perfect round of 8 opponent. Even then, I think they almost did, to be fair, and they still weren't that great. And so they weren't going to do that much more. And everyone saw in LCS, Perks was clutch. He just wasn't that great outside of that. Like, he wasn't any MVP candidate type player. So I also get the vibe personally that if Jack knew, and apparently he did, he could also get someone else to buy the contract without even losing money on it. Like, it's not like he sold it for pennies on the dollar. Then effectively it's a good deal for both parties. You know, Perk gets to go back to Europe, make a new squad, a squad that works for him with his style. Jack gets to get millions and millions of dollars and then just get a different player and go a different route. So in terms of the Perks one, nothing unusual about that. They just sold the contract as far as I know, and all parties involved were up for it. What was the other one you mentioned? Who was the other player? Alphari?
Yeah, Alphari. Also,
I would suspect same thing with Alphari. Is like, I mean, let's be real, you already know just from my work, like, it wasn't going well for him in Team Liquid. And what people don't realise is, I don't actually know if Team Liquid wanted to keep him or not, but I'm almost certain on the Alphari side he didn't want to stay. Because not only did he... I don't think it's that he disliked NA itself, but like I do think he felt betrayed by the org and the way that they sort of like... You'll notice even when they got rid of Jat, they were very careful to never publicly blame him or agree that he was the problem. They did also essentially get Alphari to sort of do like a mini version of the LST1 video and sort of admit like, I had my own problems and maybe I was part of the issue, which is like, I don't know about you, but I fucking hate it when people do that, when you're not actually to blame, but you have to sort of like fake take the blame. And I just get the vibe Alphari didn't really fuck with that and just sort of thought, this obviously isn't for me, is it? I mean, remember at one point in time, unironically, the Team Liquid org, through Jat, but sure, they had empowered him to be their voice, was publicly implying Jenkins is better than Alphari as a top laner, and that was a strategic decision to put him in the game. Like, if I was Alphari, mate, that's an insult right there. That's like if I'm Rookie and you're telling me that, like the aforementioned crying, like, oh, they just thought he would be better in this game. It's like, mate, there's not even a comparison between the two of us. Like, I'm one of the best players in the world. He's just an okay player. Like, sure, say you bench me for whatever, I'm having a dispute with the coach, but don't ever imply I'm actually worse at the game. Like, to me, that is, if you think about Alphari's character, his whole shit is how good he is at the game. That seems to be how he's built his identity. So it's such a stupid American move to think that you're going to tell the guy, right, we're just going to sort of sacrifice part of that reputation of how good you are at the game to resolve all this, Alphari. It's like, no, I say no to that deal. I know in the short term he had to do it, but like, that would stick in my craw a little bit, guys. I don't know. Obviously, it's a personal, subjective issue, but to me, those deals are ones where I got the vibe you almost were at an impasse with those two. I agree, though. I do think on the Cloud9 one, the part I think's a bit whack is just that, even though it hadn't really worked, I'm with you. It's like, if you're a Cloud9 fan, you think, right, at least I've got like 3 years of this guy. You know, we'll see what roster moves they make in season 2 and see how good. You know, you don't want it to be like that was it. Like, that's the end of the season, as it were. You know, never see it again.
Yeah, I'm surprised Alphari didn't go as ham on that episode you and Dom did.
He's just not that sort of person, mate. Like, you have to realise, if he shit talks, it's more like for fun, or he's making a serious point about that player being bad. He's not really the sort of person who wants to, like, drop dime and all that shit. And also, again, I always tell people this, people will tell you the stuff, it's just sometimes they won't say it publicly. So it's more like then all of a sudden, my speculation just bizarrely seems like I have inside him. It's more like that, you know. You can't, the problem is this, mate. Alphari might have said loads of stuff, but you might not know it because you might just think it's Thorin's opinion. You might never know, right?
Yeah.
You might never know.
By the way, he did go ham in some Twitch clips, like saying that the coach did really stupid decisions.
Oh, I had a couple that was like that. Yeah, he flamed Jat a little bit, but I mean, the thing is, he never really went ham on the org. Is I think the point he's making.
Yeah, and also...
And by the way, there's an obvious reason for that as well, which is even though this wouldn't affect me personally, these guys do at the end of the day also think, I did get paid millions for being in that org, like, that might make you not hit send on a tweet, believe it or not. I know it doesn't work for Doublelift, but for everyone else, that might make you feel a little bit of goodwill towards someone getting paid like $4 million or something, you know?
Yeah, that's something to blow.
Yeah, you know, especially if you come from fucking Wales and all you good is a children's video game. I think you might be able to sort of put that year behind you, maybe. I wouldn't, because I'm a bit of fuck, but that's all right.
I don't think he
different
has,
people.
though. It's gonna come out. At
Well,
some
the
point.
good thing is if they go to Worlds, dude, and Team Liquid makes it, I even if I put it this way, I'll at least nudge him to shit talk if they do, because you've got to do it at that point in time. Like, dude, imagine if they got drawn in the same group. Oh, that'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
It would.
That'd be the shit.
Yeah. I mean, as well, how they phrased it when they said he was benched because of quote unquote attitude issues. The fact that when you phrase it like that, you make it so vague that people will assume the worst. And
People are going to think he's like, he's like fucking Dardoch if someone says that, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you phrase it so vaguely, people just assume.
In fact, you know, when that first story broke, do you remember everyone kept saying like, "Oh my god, breaking point 2.0"? It's like, no, you morons, because the joke is they would never release that because it'd just be fucking Jazz Dardoch playing all the roles of Dardoch and Loco Doco simultaneously. Like, it'd just be him fucking terrorizing people, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
right, where we going now, boys?
Did the Vitality got like a bunch of venture capital like last year, right? Because they were trying to do that super team with perks.
Here's another thing to understand about the industry, right? First of all, Vitality already was a team with money. But another thing about it is this. Sometimes how you get the additional venture capital is tied to the deals we're talking about. Like if you can go to an investment group and say, I would like to raise 10 million euros because I want to buy an LEC slot. Now that's a different approach than just saying I need 10 million euros for whatever I want. Like that's a sell where if someone can understand the concept of the franchise league, it'll become a lot easier to get that sign off. So similarly, if you can go to someone, I can tell you this happened in CSGO a few years back. If you remember the story where SK Gaming signed the Luminosity team, it was the number one team in Counter-Strike at the time, the Brazilian team with Fallen and Cold Zero that had won the MLG Columbus Major. As far as I know, they were specifically, I think, raising the money to sign those players by telling the investors, like, we want to raise X million to get these players because they're the number one team in Counter-Strike. And the premise was, if the investor people said no, then you just didn't get the money. So sometimes even the deals sort of like tailored around what you're going to do. It's why, if you notice, it might seem weird if you're a CS fan, for example, that like some big NA org has a Valorant team, but they don't have a CSGO team because CSGO is a bigger game, right? But the reason why is, again, they might have had someone in the investment group that invests in them say, but what about this Valorant game I'm hearing about? Why don't we have a team in that? And you've just got it to sort of placate that guy, you know. Like, I'll give you a quick example of something to watch for in the future. Watch in the future how many big orgs in the West will have like a female Valorant and CSGO team, but might not even have a male team. For that exact reason, you get the right venture capitalist guy who's super woke and he wants, or maybe it's even a woman themselves and their whole thing's like, yeah, I want to see women empowered in gaming and, you know, all the fucking, the buzzwords they hit you with. Listen, if they're going to pay the money for it, maybe you do it. You can market it. It's an angle. It's not my angle, of course. I just want the best fucking players, but it's some people's angle.
Yeah.
Right, what now?
Now
that we've all agreed that it's GG for all, where are we going now, boys?
I have a topic, a different topic in mind, which is there's a problem in League. It might not be it's not a problem in CSGO or like maybe other games, but there's a problem in League is that the game changes every year. And because the game changes every year, you can't know like how good a team that was the best last year to this year, let alone a team a couple of years ago. And this is a big problem in sports. Like there's the question that people always ask, like how can you compare, for example, like Mike Tyson against Muhammad Ali, or like, which is a sport that doesn't change, boxing, even other sports like that change, like for example, F1, how does Lewis Hamilton compare to Michael Schumacher? Even there you can draw a comparison. Sure. In League, there's no way you can draw a comparison between, I mean, I could say Rookie now and Faker in season 3, but Faker is still great. But you could say, let's say Caps now and maybe Expeke in season 3. Like the game is completely different. How do you compare these two? Should there be like a new statistic that doesn't change? Like if you say, let's say DPM, or I'm just giving examples like KP, a statistic that doesn't change as the game changes, that will allow you to compare like players or teams across different eras of the game.
The problem is, I actually think League's probably the worst esports game I've come across for using stats to compare players, if you know what I mean. Like, I mean, even that one you just listed there, DPM usually is a pretty decent one, but then obviously we all know if you get the right meta and someone plays like a fucking backline Cogmore, then yeah, he's going to score a bazillion damage, isn't he? Like, whereas he actually might even win the game in that scenario. So yeah, the tough thing is, I think League already was the one where, for me, it was the most eye test heavy game anyway, and also the burden of knowledge of like even knowing what like a laner does. Like it's also a game where we all talk in the conversations in shorthand as if we all like could even be qualified to make these statements. Like, I'll give you an example. I don't come from League of Legends, and even when I play League of Legends, there's certain roles I just never play. So when I comment on players in those roles, it's actually pretty different from when I'm playing like CSGO and I comment on all the different roles. Like, I played every role in CSGO. I've watched the game for 20 years. Like, I would consider myself an expert. Sometimes in League of Legends, it's like the difference between me talking about like a support player, I've played support the whole time, and like the fucking mid lane. It could be night and day. Like in the mid lane, I have a way harder time knowing how good his laning is, or did he fuck up his reset there, or did he back at the right time? Like, those are the things I'm kind of just winging it on that, you know, or I'm going off what someone smart had said. So unfortunately for me, it just brings you back to what I think square one anyway, which is as long as you actually are an expert, you are really knowledgeable, you're mainly going off the eye test as it is anyway. And then when you compare, like you're saying, a lot of that's just meta contextual to me. What you're really doing is things like you're asking questions like, how good was this guy relative to his era? How good was he in the meta, like with the tools he had? How good was he based on like absolute concepts? Like, would he be actually still good in some regard today? Like, you can do some of that, but a lot of it, it's already sort of like a puzzle to me as it is. There's not really any clear answers, I don't think. Do you have a take on it? Like, do you have an angle as to what you think needs to be done? Or some sort of framework?
Yeah, like, I just want to comment on what you said about expertise. I don't think, like, I might be wrong, like, or like chat and shit, but can anyone be an expert in League of Legends? I feel like
I also feel like it's the game that's probably the most impossible. Put it this way, no, you know, like if you go into CS:GO and I brought someone like, I love this example, like be like Sean Gares or fucking Sponge or something, they do really seem sometimes like they know almost everything you can know, right? That person doesn't exist in League as far as I can tell, because like, I mean, you guys should know from my content, I've known the people who tried to do that, the Kelsey Moses of the world, and there's just like, remember, in CSGO, you can do what I did. For many years, I used to cynically say, I only watched the top 10 teams in the world because every big tournament had them at, right? In League of Legends, you can't really do that. Like, you have to watch, like, multiple regions. Even then, you're going to look like a fool if, like, for example, let's say you watched LCK and LPL every game, right? That would be your entire year right then. Well, bad luck if it's Season 9 and fucking G2 comes out of Europe, because now you're going to look like a moron because you don't know Europe. Like, yeah, it's probably the most information-dense fucking game of any esports game.
Yeah. And I feel like no one almost can be an expert, because to be an expert, you have to know certain things. And then next year comes and then those things react, and then you get to find new things about that. It's almost like you're adding to the stack. But if it keeps changing, you're never kind of stuck in that. It's like you try to get to 100 and then boom, it changes. Now you try to get to 100 to that, and then it changes. And then you can never become like kind of an expert at it.
You know that piece of content I did last year where it was me, Dom, and Monty, and it was like a special Summoning Insight episode where we just went over like the best players in every role.
Goats in every
like,
role.
That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Because if we had to make a list of like the greatest like raw experts in League, I wouldn't even be top 10, of course. Like, think about some of the names you could put on there. Papa Smith, like you go down the fucking line, but I'd even put people like Jat over me, of course. But here's the difference. How many of them could do that episode? Not that many, believe it or not. Like, even some of the ones that you might put forwards, they'd privately say, like, I don't have that good a memory or whatever. Like, really, that episode for me was more about just being good at talking around the game, you know, and like knowing abstract concepts or how to make an analogy between one player in a different game, or like some of that. If you notice, like, there's even being an expert isn't enough. You've also got to have like a skill set of how you think, in my opinion, because there's a lot of people like have a massive amount of like, I mean, I'll have to use terminology wise explain it as like, it's a lot of people have like an insane amount of like vertical insight into one area in the game. Like, they know everything about top lane, or they know everything about like wave manipulation. But the question is, like, are they that good at like thinking about, for example, abstractly, how do you work with a star in a team or a player with a more sacrificial mentality? Like, that's actually, you're in a different realm at that point in time, and sometimes their expertise might not even apply, or they might not have anything in that regard. You know, I've even seen some experts in League get really trapped by the feeling of like, but how can I comment when I'm not certain? It's like, yeah, but but we can't be certain. This is the ultimate game where you have to sort of just piece together something for now, and it can, as you say, it can change tomorrow.
Yeah, I know. Like, I feel like there should be a big discussion on the criteria that you use. Just the criteria, because let's say if two people don't agree on the criteria, they can never have a discussion on who's the best and who's not the best, because it's not the same discussion if you have different criteria. Like, one thing that triggers me a lot is the MVP thing, that people on broadcast, they keep saying like, oh, by the way, if you say the MVP is the most valuable to the team, then it's this player. If it's the best player, then why are we every year saying if it's this, then it's this, if it's this? Why don't we just establish what MVP means and then just keep giving MVPs? Because now you're saying, so 2 years ago, some people voted MVP because of the most valuable to their team, and some people voted who's the best player. So you're saying that vote itself is inconsistent.
Shall I give you the cynical reason why?
Okay.
Even though I don't think they've consciously thought this through like some evil bastard, I think it certainly works as a feature of that approach where, as you're saying, they seem to just come up with the criteria based on like essentially who they're going to vote for, as far as I can tell. Whereas obviously you should do it the other way around and have your criteria set and then go, right, who does this imply is the MVP, and make it consistent. I get the vibe that that's part of why people like to just make it up on the spot, because it means they can always just pick whoever they want. Like, the premise will be...
you can never hold them accountable.
Here's the joke. The same guy who would have said Bjergsen's better than Jensen like 6 years ago would have quoted things like, look how many carry champions he played, and look at the CS, look at the CS per minute at 10 minutes, and look at the same guy, this split, he would be doing, like, obviously jokingly, he would be doing a version of what talking to before, like, yeah, but like, didn't he sort of hold the team together though? He was like the mid, and he could play support as well. Like, you'd go a different angle, because you're just constructing reasons as to why he could be the MVP. Whereas if people don't get it, I've been actually totally legit in this regard. Like, I actually had to myself be last year, like, you know what? Maybe Reckless is the MVP of the fucking first split. Like, to be fair, he's on one of the best teams. He has some of the best stats. There's not that many other candidates are blatant. Going by all the criteria I've got in the past, he has to be up there. Doesn't matter that I don't like him and think he's not a very good player to watch. Like, if you're being fair, you have to be fair. You have to apply the criteria the same, whether it's your player or whether it's the fucking guy you dislike, right? So I would prefer that personally. But I would also say, I wouldn't expect this to ever be fixed, because if you watch any traditional sports, they're going more the esports route than we're going more their route. Like I watch a lot of American sports, and American sports, man, it's gotten really bad for them giving like MVPs based on like a cool narrative, Like it's almost gotten to that level if in culture where they have shows like American Idol or like Britain's Got Talent, or those shows where you go on and it's not just a talent show, you're not just showing you're a good singer or dancer or whatever. It's always like, they have a whole part about your life before they show you do the song. And eventually, as most people probably know, the joke in the UK became like winning wasn't about being the best singer, it was about having like your dad having had cancer when you were 4 and then like your mom leaving when you were 7 with AIDS, and hopefully you're also like a disabled transgender fucking lesbian, like if you could stack all these insane like heartstring pulling moments, you would just win basically because you became the most popular. So I also get the vibe there's also like some of that going on, because basically if you just have also like the coolest storyline and you're in the mix, like in traditional sports, you will win, you will be the MVP. Whereas like unfortunately the classic example is in the NBA there was a period of 10 years where you could literally have given LeBron the MVP every single year, but what happened was after they gave him the MVP like 4 years out of 5, they just almost, it's like you could tell someone was sitting down every MVP year after that, like, is there any way we could give it to someone else though? And then they would just find a new storyline. So like one season it was like, oh well, Russell Westbrook's had the most triple doubles ever, like let's ignore that he stat padded them all, he wins the MVP. And then the next one they were like, well, Kevin Durant was the leading scorer, so he would win and they just did that for the last like 6 years or something basically.
Yeah, I can see that in esports as well.
Oh, there's loads of that, mate.
Like
the joke is, if you actually let fans and media vote, they really would have given Skadoodle that like Cloud9 fucking MVP in CSGO, where he was like far from the MVP of the tournament. Well, he was just the narrative player where it's like the one who had never done anything at major and suddenly won the major, They would have given him it.
Who's that?
It was the sniper of Cloud9, Skadoodle, in 2018 when they won the CSGO major.
Okay.
But it was the equivalent of someone winning at the end of their career, when they're sort of washed.
Yeah.
Right, where we going?
Well, back on the league changing in the game, I think a lot of it has to do with like the variance in what league was season 1 to now, where I think Riot, the developer, is keeping the game pretty similar for the last 3 seasons in the foreseeable future. So there should be able to be more like contiguous stat checking in the next future seasons. And then also League, based on like the game it is, like it really depends on where esports will go in the future, if the League will still be around in like 10 or 20 years. So it might not even like matter.
Are they even keeping it similar?
I think, yeah, like they haven't changed like jungle, which is the most important change in the past like 3 years or 4 years. Like the very basics of jungle, they haven't messed with it too much. They messed like slingshotting XP and like camp timers, but that was very little variable.
I think the only reason they don't make radical changes like that is that they're scared that they will completely fuck it up and it will be embarrassing for them, like they did with the Chemtech Drake.
Yeah, but they did do Chemtech Drake.
Yeah, but they did get rid of it eventually, didn't they?
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're going, I was trying to find this like before the call, but like I can't find the LEC MVP 2022 spring. But didn't they give it to Hylissang?
It's not out yet.
They haven't done it yet, mate.
They haven't done it yet.
As far as I know, I think they're copying American sports, if you know this, because basically in American sports, even though the splits for the regular split, they stupidly always give it during the playoffs. So, like, for example, the NFL MVP is always announced just before the Super Bowl, usually, and the NBA MVP is usually announced, I think it's at the end of the first round of the playoffs. So I noticed they do something similar here, because I think another factor is, because nearly always the MVP is obviously in the playoffs, they usually also do it where they like give you it like, I think during a match you play in the playoffs, unless I'm wrong on that. I'm fairly sure that the timing's usually like during the matches, because if you remember famously, that was when like Reckless won one when he was in the fucking, I think we're talking about like season 6 summer or something, the one where he was in
it was in the third place match.
He was crying, and he was on the semis or whatever. That, like, I can't remember. It was one of the road show ones where they were on the road, and might have been Madrid or Athens or some shit, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's the fact that I even have to say, start narrowing down times that Reckless cried on stage, because you're all going, which one was it? Which of the 5 times that you remember was it? Give me a break.
Yeah.
Give me a fucking break, man.
Yeah. By the way,
that's like the ultimate summary for League of Legends, the game, and you could just get some fucker in like, I saw my dad cry once ever in his whole life.
Yeah.
I've seen Reckless cry 5 times over video game sound. Yeah, great. Brilliant game, this, isn't it? Toxic Masculinity.
yeah. By the way, what do you think, Thorin? What should the MVP be? Because I think it should be the best player overall. But what do you think? Should it be the best player to their team or the best player overall in the league?
Matt, I just want there to be a consistent rule and then everyone to abide by it. So I'm fine if you want to say the general criteria is you must be on one of the best teams and then you must be like, the best player on that team. If you don't want to go that way, we can do that. That's fine. In which case, by the way, spoiler, the actual MVP of LEC right now would be Larson in theory. Like, he's on the best team and he's the best player. Like, I think he would probably be the winner. But I do think overall, personally, I'm going to do a whole video on this because I've actually sort of semantically found the loophole that no one else has figured out, which is that we're saying you're the most valuable player of the league. We didn't say of your team.
Yes.
That was never even put in the...
Yeah,
so in my opinion, if you are like in the pure eye test, game to game, the best... So, like, luckily in LEC, this is already going to work because Vethio probably was the best anyway. But, like, I'll give you a classic example from sports. I do think it's actually insane that, like, Kobe Bryant didn't win the MVP the 2 seasons where he was just, like, if you don't know, he was just scoring, like, 35 points a game or something mental. And he had to, like, hard carry a team that shouldn't even be in the playoffs to the playoffs every year. But the premise was... because his team was like the 16th best team in the NBA, he wasn't even really qualified, like, by their structure to win the MVP. You're just not allowed to. Whereas in my opinion, if you are the best, you just win. You should just win the award, in my opinion. Because to me, the premise goes like this. It's an individual fucking award. We already have a team award. It's called the trophy. Like, you get the team award by going to the playoffs. You get the team award by winning the championship. The whole point of this award is it means that if we ever really did have Caps in the 10th place team, but he was 1v9 in every game, he can still win the award. It's not his fault his team sucks,
Yeah, I really hate the wins over replacement theory to MVP.
Unfortunately, that's so like, awful. If you notice, I think... that is I don't know if you know this, but that is super appealing to people who think of themselves as very logical. They all love that argument. The idea that basically it's the player that if you took them off their team, the team would have the least amount of wins. But the problem with that philosophy is loads of times it's just going to mean it's someone who's on like the fourth best team. And in fact, if you're on a super team, you aren't even allowed to win anymore, basically, you know?
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason why I hate the thing to your team, because it, like, I know it's difficult to kind of win from a bad team, but it's also easy to look good on a bad team. So, and a great player on a good team is hard for them to have the contrast between them, like the G2 2019. I mean, they still gave it, I think, to Young Cost, maybe Reckless as well last year, or that was 2021. But it's ridiculous. Like, look at G2 2019. Who would you give MVP on that roster? Probably the best player is on there, but it's hard to give it to one of them. You could replace any of them and they might still be the best. So
it's why the joke is, if you remember, it was Jankos that won the MVPs in that team, because the premise was no one could tell who was doing what. And so the logic was, like, if Jankos can really just service this whole team, must be him.
Yeah.
That was sort of the logic, you know.
Yeah. It's always the jungler that gets it, kind of like in NA as well.
Yeah,
On the super teams, for sure, yeah. For sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have another angle? Talking, you've been pretty quiet, mate. What do you want to talk about?
League of Legends, I don't really like play the game too much. I just kind of watch the esports side of it. So like all this talk about like how the game works, like I have no idea how the game works. I just
don't worry about that.
Do you watch LEC, Token?
No, I only watch like NALCS just because of.
All right, what are you into then? You tell us what you think's interesting at the moment.
Let's see. I think the one thing I found super, like, the fall from grace for like TSM. Like, I was wondering, is this like, are they just now going to be like a CLG, like a bottom tier team? Because, you know, like the hierarchy of like NA has always just been, was it like TSM, Cloud9, Team Liquid, and like that trend also like exists in like LEC, which I follow like occasionally with like, you know, like G2 and Fnatic, like just consistently being like near the top of the standings for the league. But with how things are going right now, it really seems super bleak on like, how is TSM gonna like bounce back from this? Like, is their time being like a top tier org just kind of done? Like, what can they do to kind of like reaffirm themselves as a top tier team, you know, like a team that players would want to join?
The problem is, I actually think the biggest factor that decides if you live or die now is actually nothing to do with money or how good the team is. It is whether you're attractive to the free agents, basically. And the problem TSM has right now is, I think they are now entering the first season ever where they are not attractive to free agents, because they no longer have a single player anyone wants to play with. And before any idiot even thinks of going, but Speaker was the MVP, isn't this like his third split in his entire life? Well, fourth, I think. I think it's his fourth split ever in his career or something mental, right? This guy, like, listen, he isn't a draw like Bjergsen is. Like, these are people where you think to yourself, if I join, I'm going to win and do big shit. So the problem they have at the moment is so many people have left their org in all regards. Like, what even is TSM at the point? At this point in time, it's just Reggie, and then, as you see with the coaches, who knows what the fuck you have beyond that. So they could certainly pay the money still to get the talent. There's certainly going to be some people who will consider them, but they're going to be nowhere near the first destination, in my opinion. I think they've really cracked, like, they've shattered, for my money, the whole rep. I think Fnatic would have been in this spot, but the reason Fnatic dodged it is because it turned out Upset and Hylissang is the shit. So it turns out everyone wants to play with them. So I think they sort of low-key, that's what saved Fnatic, for my money, when Fnatic maybe wasn't going to be the one that would be the win that would win the bidding war, as it were.
Yeah.
So that's what worries me if you're a TSM fan. Obviously, I love it. I do give a fuck, let them burn forever. But in theory, if I was, you know, wanting them to succeed.
I think if Reggie is like allowed to come back to the league team, because he's like out because of the investigation thing, right? Like he can't contact with league team, or is that misinformation?
I don't know. I believe there's something like that, but who knows?
Yeah, but I believe.
But this way, technically, like, it's not your fault anyway. It's not like misinformation in that regard, is it? Like, you just be incorrect, so don't worry.
Okay, so I think that if Reggie is allowed to kick the ass of the team again, then he'll fix TSM to like be better than they are now, assuming he can get back into the team.
Nah.
Here's why they won't, mate. I'll tell you right now why that won't work this time. Dude, 2 of the players speak Chinese. And then the other one's tactical. Like, I'm sorry, but like, there is no shouting at them is going to make this one work, I'm afraid. And then last things last, there's no Bjergsen. Remember, every time TSM went to shit, Bjergsen did one of 2 things. Either 1, play dog shit like Zillion to support the team and make them win, or 2, back in the day, he used to just hard carry. They don't have there's no Bjergsen anymore. So unfortunately, like, that used to work when you had like the NA players. I don't think first of all, I don't think Reggie could even communicate that way. You have to go through a translator and then, technically it's an interpreter when you're speaking. And then the other thing is, I just think culturally that isn't going to work at all, mate, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm thinking past off season, so past summer. So
well, put it this way, maybe he could do it for like next year's team, but I think this team's sort of fucked, mate. I don't really know how. I wouldn't even know how you turn this squad around now. I think it's really just for real. It's just failed. It's just a shit team, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just failed. There's no reviving it. Like, if you got Lena leaving, Path leaving, and they're expressing publicly that the team is making decisions that don't make sense, then it's all going down. Like, scandal after scandal. There's no TSM. That's it. It's done.
Makes me wonder, like, does Pika like even want to stay in this team like after this year? Because like it feels like they're trying to like prop him up as like the new TSM boy, but like with how terribly they're doing right now, does he even want to stay after this year? Like, will he try to look for greener pastures elsewhere?
Here's the problem, mate. So you know when everyone always tells you that shit, TSM fans, of course. You know when they always go, no, but Reggie's a great guy. If you ever want to leave, he'll just let you go. Go ask my mate Sven about how that works. It isn't true, by the way. I don't know if you know the story. When Sven played with Mithy and they had a bad first year, he was like, yeah, I want to go back to Europe as well. And they were like, what do you mean? You both can't go. You have to stay. And he was just forced to stay and play the next year. By the way, he had signed a contract. That is just what he'd agreed to. I suspect personally that part of why Reggie was magnanimous is his team was on fucking top, guys. They were one of the best teams. At that point, you can freely go, yeah, you can leave. I'll get someone else. If Speaker leaves now, TSM's done. I wouldn't be surprised if TSM says, like, you're here till the end, mate. So I'm just looking it up now. Oh, actually, no, his contract does end the end of this year.
Yeah, I remember
so in theory,
seeing that somewhere. So
in theory, he could leave, if he wants to. Then again, though, he's one of the little rats that's also fucking bigged up TSM a million times. So go on then, double down. You love him. Fucking sign. Put a ring on it, motherfucker. Exactly.
Like,
and get rid of that fucking middle parting from 1993 as well. You're not in fucking Degrassi or something right now, mate. This is actually 2022, and you aren't swag or whatever the fuck kids say now. I don't know. What do kids say now?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, like, but like Speaker's contract like running out at the end of the year, because like I was just kind of doing brainstorming on my own of just like what can like Team Liquid do to kind of like bolster their roster, because like I'm not really like too fan of like a Santorin for like long term. So like obviously like the two NA junglers you would look at is like Blabber and like Spica. I was wondering like if either of those like joining like Team Liquid would like push them to like a serious like contender towards Worlds, because that seems like some of the next like, you know, the next generational talent that like NA has for like jungle.
Okay.
Don't know if I want to see Bjergsen with any of those junglers.
Not even Blabber.
Yeah, the joke was Bjergsen ruins the jungle.
That's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Well, who knows? Maybe that's actually how you fix it. Maybe you get Blabber and then Bjergsen just plays a supportive mid and just, now he's the bitch. Ha ha ha. Now he has to do what the jungler says. Maybe just reverse the power dynamic. That would be a hell of a way to go out.
By the way, does Bjergsen have to go 0-20 for like 2 years? For
yes.
The casters
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Yeah, he does.
Like, seriously.
He does.
They refuse to criticize him in any way. It's ridiculous.
I know. Put it this way, he's just in the fucking reckless camp, mate, where they just have some perverse, like, special treatment, you know, where they're just never allowed to be considered bad, are they?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even Caps, like I love Caps, he's great, but like when he was not so good this year, no one was saying like, oh yeah, like, and they always give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, I mean, he can turn it around, be the best again, but currently he's not. So yeah, that's another topic as well that I was thinking maybe to bring up, that like sometimes pundits have like a slight bias. I'm not talking about broadcasters; they have like a lot of bias, but even people like LS and Rich have some small biases. I'm not saying that they're delusional or something. Like, for example, I noticed Rich said last time, I think on Side Select, that he was criticizing the way Upset plays. And to be fair to Rich, he's completely logical. Like, he even defended Upset when the Upset Adam drama happened. And he was like, yeah, I mean, he's right to want better players players around him. But I found it strange when he said like, oh yeah, but even though that upset broke the reckless record, but he was still playing like a bitch. And then I was like, that's a bit strange when you look at how upset plays, because he literally, you can see him against Vitality, like dashing through walls on Zeri, like and literally diving the tower to kill perks just for fun, and playing like on the edge, like literally pushing the lane 24/7 with Hylissang. I don't think he was playing like coy in any way, shape or form. And also on the other side, pundits can be positive about the player they might like LS recently. I love LS, is brilliant. I love everything he does, but he was saying that Nemesis was the best Western mid laner. I was like, what the hell? There's VTO, there's Caps, there's Humanoid, Jensen. How can you say that Nemesis is the best like Western mid laner? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right, I'll tell you the premise that's going on here basically is, you notice that when you were saying all that, you didn't like really address their reasons as much. You more like gave their take, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is these are super idiosyncratic takes. So for example, if you don't know, obviously Forgiven wasn't just in H2K. As a result, Rich knows him on a personal level and was part of the way he even got brought back in the org. So essentially, he is just more biased towards the Forgiven super aggro style of ADC. And while I agree with you, in the modern context, actually Upset's playing fairly aggressive. The problem is he does also play with the support most famous for Roman, and then you're just 1v2 in the lane, you know. So unfortunately, that isn't kind of like the old Forgiven style, where the joke is Forgiven would just have you under your tower as the opposing laner, no matter where his jungler is or what this team was doing. He was just trying to do that 24/7. That was just his style of play. So he's just more biased to that style of play, I would say. And then the LS one is even easier to explain, which is actually, LS even explains himself. It's just that his problem goes like this. LS's first sentence is always so shocking, you're not even listening to it. His second sentence, you're still processing what the fuck the first sentence means. So when he says Nemesis is the best Western mid laner, and he even said some mad shit like, and you'd be dishonest if you didn't say so. You're just thinking exactly like you did, like, what the fuck? Like, I've just seen Vethio, Larson, like, what is he talking about? But you have to realise, he even points out that, like, if you've watched his stream, so immediately he's now talking about LS playing 5 ping solo queue in Korea, and what he's talking about is things like what he thinks correct laning is, pure mechanics, like understanding how to close a game. So LS is going on his own metrics entirely, and by those he thinks Nemesis is mega underrated. Basically, if you don't realize, there's a classic example that's more extreme that Ellis himself did in season 9, which was in season 9 he did a tier list of mid laners. I think it was going into the summer, and he did like S8, and he put like Selfie on like I think like A tier or something. And the reason this is mad, if people don't know, is Selfie didn't even play in any league at the time. He was just a fucking benched or like sub, or I don't even know, he was a streamer or something. And so LS's logic again was like, if you've seen him play solo queue, or you know what he's capable of, or you know like how he thinks about the game, then you'd agree that he is one of the best. So again, that's just a super fringe case for my money, you know. It's more just like a really extremely. Put it this way, I have my own version. It's just the problem is you'd have to know like CSGO more to know who they are, you know. I think you have to be like a mega expert usually to have like a really fringe case, you think like that, you know.
Yeah. I think I don't mind it, to be fair, like because of LS, he tends to overrate people that are like his friends, like Malice, Nemesis, even Selfie. I think bootcamped in Korea for a period of time and was very close with LS. But yeah, so sometimes it's almost like the people don't like that, like you said, the play style. So they just criticize that player and just say like, oh, he's not good, just because they don't like that play style. Like as well, LS said before that I seem like I'm not talking shit about LS, but just this bit about when he said that Hylissang is not even thinking when he's playing, but he just doesn't like the play style. So, and he's like, okay, I don't like the play style. Therefore...
Here's the problem though, mate. I agree with that take, as much as that might shock you. Like, here's the problem.
Yeah, but it's instinct.
Yeah, then you're agreeing with LS.
Okay, fair enough.
Instinct, you don't think about your instincts, mate. Your instinct is if someone puts their hand in your face, you flinch.
That's true, yeah.
So that the point is, by definition, you don't think. Instinct is you just react. Right, here's the thing. I actually think low-key, this is a great example of how different regions and different narratives affect how people think. Right? If I talk about Blabber, right, it's going to sound so different if I talk about Hylissang. But in my opinion, they both share one key quality, which is I actually think they would do those players no matter who is on their team. and no matter who the opposition is. Now, listen, I actually think for both that can be good and be really bad. Like, I've seen it. Everyone might know this. If you go back to, I think it was like season 10 or whatever, when they were on the lineup where they didn't have caps on Fnatic. Do you remember some of those games when Hylissang would play the non-Hylissang champions and he would just play it like it was Pyke, dude?
Yes, yeah.
He played Nautilus like it was Pyke. And as a result, he would int like a motherfucker. He would play like Galio and he'd be like, what are you doing, my dude? Like, does he even know what champion he's? This isn't Thresh, you know? And he would just do that anyway. So it's funny. The reason I gave the Blabber example is because Blabber's so much younger in his career and hasn't played on as great teams, it's so easy for everyone to diss Blabber and be like, oh, wasn't that like a bit too much? But he's doing the same thing. He's just playing off instinct. He's just going for players. He sees an opening, he just grabs it. That's why I joked, like, I made that joke on Somebody Insight, like Thresh Qs and Lee Sin Qs are the same thing. The joke is it's while you press the Q and you're going in, you formulate your plan, you just see an opening when you throw the Q. Like, you only know it's a bad... The joke is you only know it's a bad Q once you've already just about landed in the middle of the fight and you see they're going to delete you, don't you? Like, no one really knows until that moment whether it's like... Because the problem with the kind of players they go for is it's like taking a really long-range three-pointer in basketball, right? In theory, your coach, if he sees you go for it, should be going, no, pass. Oh, yeah, good job, because you made it. Like, but if you didn't make it, he'd obviously be going, what the fuck are you doing? So it's more like that. So, like... My problem is this, is if you put Hylissang on the best team, he'll look like a genius all the time because he's got players who can make use of what he's doing. But I genuinely think if you put him on the worst team in LEC, he'd go for most of those players. And, like, I'm going to give an extreme example, but, like, he'd have a reputation more akin to, like, Promiscue. Obviously, I'm making it extreme on purpose, but you get my premise. Like, people would just be like, like Jack Troll, they'd be like, he's just in, like, what the fuck's he doing? Because they wouldn't see what he was going for, or, someone wouldn't follow up, or a million factors that he can play in,
Yeah, exactly.
And by the way, here's the other thing I'll say as well. Notice how amazing for talk shows it is that these guys have these strong opinions. We could do a whole 20-minute segment on that. Meanwhile, I look at every other pundit and it's like, please, for the love of God, can you just tell me who's bad? Is anyone bad? Is everyone just good at the game? What's going on? Like,
no, exactly.
I get frustrated. The others don't tell me. Like, because here's my key thing, mate. As long as someone's honest with their bias, great. We're all biased, so just put your cards on the table and then I can navigate around that.
No, I agree. Like, I respect LS. He's putting his opinion out there to be challenged, to be mocked, to be disagreed with. At least he has the balls to actually say his opinion and not just hide behind like very vague and kind of not politically correct, but safe opinions, like very mellow and not very kind of controversial opinions. At least he's actually saying what he thinks and putting it out there to be kind of challenged. Yeah.
I think we'll cut it there. I think that was pretty good. Everything good, boys?
Could I ask a CS:GO question?
If you want, let's do one last question. Then go on.
Yeah. To keep on with the Team Liquid theme. Right now, like as like we get further and further away from like 2019 and like the Intel Grand Slam days, it kind of feels like Liquid are kind of like definitely kind of like faltering in terms of like like being a top tier team. And I was wondering if there is like any sort of roster they can kind of put together to kind of like push themselves back to like the top echelon of CSGO, because it's been like a long time since they've really been the title contender. And as the years go on, like Naf and Elige are only going to get like worse and worse. And I was wondering...
Here's the problem, mate.
Yeah.
There's only 1 year in the history of Team Liquid I actually considered them like a competent tactical team, and that was in 2018. And the main reason why, to my knowledge, is because that's the year when Nitro had Zeus, his coach, the famous Brazilian coach who won the majors with the SK Gaming and Luminosity guys. And he basically sort of had him in a headspace where he was actually doing a good job tactically calling the game. Every other year of their career, they have just survived off star power. So they had Simple and Elige back in the day. Then in 2019, when they didn't have Zeus, they had the super team with like arguably the most skilled team to ever play CSGO. And their whole style in those eras is you go as far as the stars can carry you, which is one of the reasons, by the way, why Liquid chokes. Because guess what? One of the most fragile things in the world is raw aim. That'll go away when you're in a nervous moment. Like, if you get scared, like, the best player in the world gets paralyzed by fear sometimes. It can happen. That can make you lose a game alone. Whereas like a structure and the tactical play, especially in Counter-Strike, that gives you like a flaw to your game that you're never going to drop too far below. You've always got a way to get more out of the game than just people shooting each other's heads off. So in my opinion, the number one most obvious roster move Liquid would make, and if you notice, they did the opposite of this in the off-season, would be get a world-class in-game leader. They should get someone who is like very good in game leading, because they've already got good pieces. Like Nathan and Leisure are still two very good players, mate. Two of the best riflers in the game. So in my opinion, they just need a better structure in the team. And unfortunately, they've gone the opposite approach at the moment. So I suspect it'll be another slightly disappointing year where they'll probably be like the 8th or the 10th best team or something again, mate, I'm afraid.
Yeah, like who do you think can fit that bill as like a good who?
Well, here's the saddest thing of all, mate. If you want to get really depressed, I even told Team Liquid right back at the end of 2018, just trust me on this, get Carrigan, sign him for like 3 years and just build the team. And they didn't listen, so they didn't do it. So they could have had Carrigan, they could have had everyone, mate. There was once upon a time, Team Liquid used to be a very like cool destination to go. So they missed out on some of the big shots, unfortunately, and they didn't take them.
Yeah, I'm definitely super jealous to just see like Twist right now playing with Kerrigan. It's like, oh, like
there you go.
I can't even imagine what it would have been like if they had like.
Oh, mate, imagine if Carrigan had literally had Elige, Twist, and Naf to work with. Mate, I can't even come. That might have been like 2019 on steroids, as the old fucking cliche goes. You know, that might have been an even better version of that team.
Yeah,
could have been amazing, right? But the problem is, and this is the problem in esports in general. Everyone will forget it now, but anytime someone gets kicked, it always makes people emotionally feel like, they're a loser. So people just didn't believe in him. They were like, maybe that's the end for him, though. It's like, yeah, well, how did that work out? How's that worked out since? Exactly.
Yeah.
So whatever. He's now had 2 teams if people don't know that we're ahead of Team Liquid. Enough said.
Jeez, yeah.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Toucan, William Peyton Lacy, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are. Maybe you want to take part in a lengthy donated discussion with me. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Illuminati today. Where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.